June 15, 1944. Saipan. A Type 95 Hago tank sits burning in the tropical sun, black smoke pouring from its open hatches. Inside, 3 Japanese crewmen are already dead. One never made it out. The other 2 burned alive trying to escape through hatches that had warped shut from the heat. This wasn't some freak accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was Tuesday. Between 1935 and 1945, Japan built over 2,300 Type 95 Hago light tanks. It was their most produced tank of World War II, their main armor for the entire Pacific campaign. And it became a rolling death sentence for almost everyone who climbed inside. At Tarawa, in November 1943, 14 Hago tanks faced American forces. All 14 were destroyed in less than 6 hours. Most never damaged a single enemy vehicle. On Saipan, Japanese tank crews charged American positions in desperate night attacks. Not one Hago survived. American after-action reports describe it with chilling simplicity. Enemy armor destroyed. Our losses, 0. American tankers developed a dark nickname for the Hago. They called them cigarette lighters because of how quickly they caught fire when hit. Some U.S. crews reported they didn't even need their main guns. Their machine guns alone could punch through the Hago's armor. Think about that for a second. A machine gun, not an anti-tank weapon, not a tank cannon. A machine gun could penetrate what was supposed to protect these crews. Japanese tank soldiers knew this. By 1943, every man assigned to a Hago understood he was climbing into a steel coffin. Survivor interviews after the war reveal the same phrases over and over. We knew we were going to die. Our weapons couldn't hurt them. Their bullets went through our armor like paper. So, how did this happen? How did Japan's main battle tank become such a catastrophic failure that its own crews considered it a death trap? The answer isn't simple incompetence. It's actually far more disturbing than that. It's a story about how military institutions can fail the soldiers they're supposed to protect, about fighting tomorrow's war with yesterday's assumptions, about the deadly gap between what generals think will work and what actually works when the bullets start flying. And it starts not with failure, but with promise. Because in 1935, when the first Hago rolled off the production line, Japanese military planners thought they'd built exactly what they needed. They were catastrophically wrong. Tokyo, 1933. The Imperial Japanese Army has a problem. Japan's expanding into China. They're building an empire across Asia. And they need tanks that can support infantry across thousands of miles of diverse terrain. Mountains, jungles, rice paddies, cities. Tanks that can be loaded onto trains and ships. Tanks that won't break down in tropical heat or Manchurian cold. European powers are building heavy tanks with thick armor. France has the Char B1. Britain's developing infantry tanks with 60 millimeters of frontal armor. But Japan looks at these designs and says, wrong approach. They're too slow, too heavy, too expensive. Japan's not fighting in the fields of France. They're fighting in Asia, where mobility matters more than armor, where the enemy doesn't have modern anti-tank weapons, where a light, fast tank can run circles around slower, heavier designs. So, Mitsubishi gets the contract. Build us a light tank that's fast, reliable, and cheap enough to produce in quantity. The result debuts in 1935, the Type 95 Hago. On paper, it looks brilliant for Japan's needs. Weighs just 7.4 tons, light enough to cross bridges that would collapse under heavier tanks. Fast, too. Top speed of 45 kilometers per hour, faster than most infantry tanks of the era. The 37mm main gun can punch through light fortifications and suppress enemy positions. Two 6.5mm machine guns provide anti-infantry firepower. 3-man crew keeps it simple. Driver up front, commander gunner in the turret, loader radio operator in back. Smaller crew means more space for fuel and ammunition. More operational range. The armor's thin, just 12 millimeters at the thickest points, 6 millimeters on the sides. But Japanese planners aren't worried. The enemies they expect to fight don't have weapons that can penetrate even 12 millimeters of steel. Chinese forces are equipped with rifles and occasional anti-tank rifles. Against those threats, 12 millimeters is plenty. And at first, it seems like they're right. The Second Sino-Japanese War erupts. Hago tanks roll into China, and they're devastating. Chinese troops have never faced armor before. They have no anti-tank guns, no tanks of their own. When Hago tanks appear, supporting Japanese infantry, Chinese defensive lines collapse. The 37mm gun tears through sandbag fortifications. The machine guns suppress enemy positions. The speed lets them exploit breakthroughs, turning tactical victories into routs. Japanese tank crews rack up victory after victory. Field reports flow back to Tokyo. The Ha-Go works. The doctrine works. Light, mobile armor supporting infantry against poorly equipped opponents exactly as planned. Japanese military planners congratulate themselves. They've built the perfect tank for Asian warfare. Cost-effective, reliable, combat-proven. There's just one problem they haven't considered. China doesn't have tanks. China doesn't have modern anti-tank weapons. China doesn't have 45mm armor-piercing guns. But 1,500 miles northwest, across the Manchurian border, someone else does. And in the summer of 1939, Japanese Ha-Go tanks are about to meet them. Manchuria, July 1939. The border between Japanese-controlled Manchukuo and Soviet-controlled Mongolia. What starts as a border skirmish over a patch of worthless grassland escalates fast. The Soviets send reinforcements. Japan sends reinforcements. Within weeks, thousands of troops are facing off across a remote stretch of Asian steppe most people have never heard of. The Japanese are confident. They've been crushing Chinese forces for 2 years. Their commanders expect the Soviets will be no different. Then, Soviet tanks appear on the horizon. BT-5 and BT-7 fast tanks. They look similar to the Ha-Go light, mobile designs, but the similarities end there. The BT-5 mounts a 45mm gun. The BT-7 has armor up to 20mm thick on the front. These are tanks designed to fight other tanks. The Ha-Go crews have never faced enemy armor before. Their training focused on supporting infantry, destroying fortifications, suppressing enemy positions. Tank versus tank combat was theoretical, something they practiced but never expected to actually do. Now they're about to get a brutal education. The first engagement happens at range. Soviet tanks spot Japanese armor at about 1,200 meters. They open fire. At that distance, the Soviet 45mm guns can penetrate the Ha-Go's 12mm frontal armor. Not sometimes, every time. The math is simple and unforgiving. The Japanese return fire. Their 37mm guns bark, shells fly down range. Most miss at this distance. The few that hit bounce off the Soviet armor, ricochet away, do nothing. Japanese tank commanders realize they need to close the distance. Get within 500 meters, maybe 300, where their guns have a chance of penetration. They order their drivers forward. It's a death sentence. Closing from 1,200 meters to 300 meters while under fire from weapons that can kill you at any range, while your own gun can't touch them until you're practically on top of them? That's not a tactical maneuver. That's a suicide run. Ha-Go after Ha-Go gets hit trying to close the distance. Soviet gunners are competent, well-trained. Their guns are accurate, and the Ha-Go's thin armor offers no protection. When a 45mm armor-piercing round hits a Ha-Go, it punches straight through. Then it keeps going, ricocheting inside the cramped crew compartment. Metal fragments called spalling spray through the interior at supersonic speeds. Crew members are killed instantly, cut down by their own armor turned into shrapnel. If the tank doesn't explode immediately, ammunition starts cooking off from the heat. Fires spread fast in the confined space. Escape hatches that seemed adequate in training become death traps in combat. Crews have seconds to get out before the whole thing goes up. The Soviet tankers later describe it as target practice. Japanese tanks advancing in textbook formation, easy to track, easy to hit. Some Soviet crews rack up 5, 6, 7 kills in a single engagement. Japanese commanders keep ordering attacks. The Hago tanks keep dying, crew after crew lost. By the time the battle ends in late August, Japan has lost over 40 tanks. The Soviets dominate the battlefield. The survivors send urgent reports back to Tokyo. The message is clear, desperate, impossible to misunderstand. The Hago is obsolete. Against modern armor, it's a death trap. We need better tanks, heavier armor, bigger guns. We cannot fight like this. Tokyo receives the reports, reads them, files them away. The response is bureaucratic, infuriating, and ultimately fatal. This was an aberration. The crews weren't properly trained. The tactics were wrong. The Ha-Go design is sound. Production continues unchanged. Doctrine remains the same. The institutional machinery of the Imperial Japanese Army cannot admit that its main tank, its core armored warfare philosophy, is fundamentally flawed. 2 years later, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and the enemies they'll face in the Pacific make Soviet tanks look primitive by comparison. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. America enters the war, and Japanese tank crews are about to face an industrial nightmare they cannot possibly comprehend. In the early battles, Philippines, Malaya, Dutch East Indies, Burma, the Ha-Go still performs reasonably well. American and British forces in these regions have light tanks, inadequate anti-tank weapons. The Ha-Go can hold its own. Japanese commanders think maybe the Khalkhin Gol disaster was a fluke after all. Then 1943 arrives, and with it comes the M4 Sherman medium tank. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. The Ha-Go weighs 7.4 tons. The Sherman weighs 30 tons, 4 times heavier. The Ha-Go's main gun is 37 millimeters. The Sherman's is 75 millimeters, twice the diameter, exponentially more powerful. The Ha-Go has 12 millimeters of frontal armor. The Sherman has 51 millimeters, more than 4 times thicker. The Ha-Go's crew of 3 is cramped, overworked, with the commander pulling double duty as gunner. The Sherman's crew of 5 has specialized roles: commander commands, gunner guns, loader loads, driver drives, bow gunner assists. Everyone does one job well instead of 2 jobs poorly. But the real killer? The engagement envelope. A Sherman can penetrate a Ha-Go's armor at over 2,000 meters. That's more than a mile. The Sherman's gun is so powerful, and the Ha-Go's armor so thin, that American tankers can kill them from distances where the Japanese crews can barely see them. Meanwhile, the Ha-Go's 37 millimeters gun cannot penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at any practical range. Not at 1,000 meters, not at 500 meters, not even point blank. The armor-piercing rounds just bounce off. The only chance a Ha-Go has of killing a Sherman is getting around to the side or rear, closing to under 300 meters, and hitting the thinner armor at a perpendicular angle. Good luck doing that when the Sherman can kill you from a mile away. American tankers figure this out fast. After-action reports from Marine and Army tank units describe engagements in cold, clinical terms. Enemy armor engaged at 1,400 meters. 3 enemy tanks destroyed. Our losses, none. Some American crews don't even bother with their main guns. The M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine gun, the same weapon mounted on jeeps and half-tracks, can penetrate Ha-Go armor at 500 meters, especially the sides and rear. There are documented cases of Shermans destroying Ha-Go tanks using only machine gun fire. Think about what that means. A weapon designed to shoot infantry can punch holes through what's supposed to be a tank. The Ha-Go isn't just outmatched, it's been reduced to something less than an armored vehicle. November 1943. Tarawa Atoll. The first major test of Japanese defenses against American amphibious assault. The Japanese have 14 Ha-Go tanks dug in on Baitio Island. They're not being used as mobile armor anymore. That's already been recognized as suicide. Instead, they're buried as static pillboxes, acting as immobile gun platforms. On November 22nd, Marine Corps M4 Shermans land on the beach. The dug-in Ha-Go tanks fire first. They have the advantage of prepared positions, concealment, first shot. Their 37mm guns target the Shermans at medium range. The rounds bounce off, ricochet away, do nothing. The Shermans return fire. Within 6 hours, all 14 Ha-Go tanks are destroyed, smashed to pieces by 75mm guns firing high explosive and armor-piercing rounds. Some are blown apart, others catch fire and burn. The lucky crews escape. Most don't. Marine reports note the complete one-sidedness of the engagement. The Japanese tanks never disabled a single Sherman. Not one. But Tarawa is just the beginning. June 1944, Saipan. The Japanese garrison includes approximately 40 Ha-Go tanks. The officers in charge know everyone knows by now that these tanks cannot survive against American armor. But orders are orders. On the night of June 16th, Japanese commanders launch a desperate counterattack. Ha-Go tanks leading infantry in a night assault, hoping darkness will negate American range advantages. It doesn't work. American positions have artillery support, naval gunfire, air support, and Shermans. The attack turns into a slaughter. Tanks destroyed by naval shells before they even reach American lines. Those that survive the bombardment run straight into Sherman fire. By dawn, every attacking Ha-Go is a burning wreck. 40 tanks, hundreds of crew and supporting infantry, 0 American tanks lost. And here's the part that breaks you when you really think about it. Some American tankers report feeling bad about it. One Sherman commander later described it as unsporting, like shooting fish in a barrel, target practice against enemies who never had a chance. But those enemies were men. Young Japanese soldiers climbing into machines they knew couldn't protect them, following orders they knew were suicidal, doing their duty even when their duty meant certain death. What was it like for them? What went through their minds as they strapped into a Ha-Go, knowing what awaited them? Let's find out. Meet Sergeant Tanaka. He's a composite, built from survivor interviews, military records, and post-war testimonies. But every detail of his experience is real. This happened to hundreds of men. It's June 1944. Somewhere in the Marianas, Tanaka commands a Ha-Go with 2 crewmen. Yamamoto drives, Sato loads, and operates the radio. They've been together 6 months. That's a lifetime in a Ha-Go crew. Morning routine starts with inspection. The engine's unreliable, always has been. Parts are scarce. Tanaka and his crew perform maintenance with whatever they can scavenge. A bolt from a destroyed truck. Wire from a downed aircraft. Make it work, or die trying. Inside the Ha-Go, space is claustrophobic. 6 feet long, barely 5 feet wide in the crew compartment. Tanaka stands in the turret to see anything, his upper body exposed above the armor. Yamamoto peers through a narrow vision slit that gives him maybe 30 degrees of forward view. Sato is crammed in the back, surrounded by ammunition racks and the radio set, knees pulled to his chest. The temperature is unbearable. Outside, it's 95 degrees. Inside, it's 120, maybe more. The metal hull turns the tank into an oven. Humidity makes every breath feel like drowning. The smell is suffocating oil, exhaust fumes, human sweat, fear. They know what's coming. Yesterday, another Ha-Go crew burned to death 300 meters from where Tanaka's tank is positioned. Last week, 5 tanks destroyed in an afternoon. The week before that, 7. Sato is 19 years old. He writes a letter to his mother every morning. He never sends them. What would he say? I'm going to die in this metal box, and there's nothing I can do about it? Orders come through the radio. Support infantry attack. Advance to grid coordinates. Engage enemy armor if encountered. Engage enemy armor. Like, they have a choice. The crew exchanges looks. No words needed. They've had this conversation a dozen times. They know the Sherman can kill them from distances where they can't even hurt it back. They know their armor won't stop machine gun bullets. They know this is probably their last mission. Tanaka makes them check their personal effects. Letters, photos, family mementos. These stay outside the tank. If they don't come back, at least someone can send these things home. Yamamoto starts the engine. It catches on the third try. Small mercies. They advance through jungle terrain, branches scraping the hull. Tanaka stands in the turret hatch, scanning for threats. Radio chatter crackles other tanks reporting contact with enemy forces. The chatter gets shorter, more frantic, then stops. At 1,500 meters, Tanaka spots the Sherman. His stomach drops. He knows the math. At this distance, the Sherman's gun can penetrate them easily. Their gun can't even scratch it. He orders Yamamoto to close distance, use the terrain for cover. They need to get within 300 meters for any chance at a side shot. It's suicide, but it's the only option. The Sherman fires first at 1,000 meters. The round hits dirt 20 meters short, explodes. The concussion rocks the Ha-Go. Tanaka's shouting orders. Yamamoto's wrestling the controls. Sato's loading a shell. Hands shaking so badly he almost drops it. Second shot. This one doesn't miss. The impact is deafening. The 75mm armor-piercing round punches through the 12mm armor like it isn't even there. Sounds like someone hitting a tin can with a hammer, except the tin can is your entire world. Metal fragments spray through the interior, spalling. The armor that's supposed to protect them becomes the weapon that kills them. Yamamoto takes the fragments in the back and head, dead before he can scream. The ammunition starts cooking off. Small explosions, then bigger ones. Fire spreading. Tanaka and Sato scramble for the hatches. 30 seconds from penetration to catastrophic fire. Maybe less. Tanaka gets out, burns on his arms and face. Sato gets out. Half his body burned. Clothes on fire. Yamamoto stays inside. Forever. They collapse 50 meters away, watching their tank burn. Black smoke rising into the tropical sky. Another Ha-Go destroyed 300 meters to their left. Another one beyond that. 3 tanks. 9 men. 6 dead. 3 wounded. 0 enemy casualties. Sato dies 2 days later from his burns. In the field hospital, delirious with pain, he keeps repeating the same thing. We never had a chance. We never had a chance. Tanaka survives the war. In a 1952 interview, he says something that captures the whole tragedy. We weren't soldiers fighting a war. We were sacrifices to a system that refused to admit it was wrong. Every time we climbed into that tank, we knew. We all knew. So here's the question everyone asks. Why didn't Japan just build better tanks? The answer isn't stupidity. It's not like Japanese engineers didn't know how to design heavier armor. They knew exactly what the problems were. Survivor reports made it crystal clear. The Ha-Go was obsolete by 1943, maybe earlier. But knowing you have a problem and being able to fix it are 2 completely different things. Let's start with the brutal economics. In 1941, Japan's steel production was roughly 7 million tons per year. America's was 75 million tons, 10 times more. Japan's entire industrial output for a year equaled what America could produce in about 5 weeks, and that limited steel had to go somewhere. The Japanese Navy was building the Yamato-class battleships. Each one required enough steel to build over 1,000 tanks. Aircraft production was expanding. Merchant shipping needed constant replacement because American submarines were sinking everything that moved. Tank production got whatever was left over. And what was left over wasn't much. The numbers tell the story. During the entire war, Japan produced roughly 6,400 tanks total, all types combined. America produced 88,000 tanks in the same period, 14 tanks for every 1 Japanese tank. Japan was fighting an industrial war with a colonial economy. You can't win that fight. But even within these constraints, Japan made choices, bad choices. The military leadership decided that tanks couldn't win the Pacific War. Naval power could. Air power could. Tanks? Secondary. Defensive. good enough for holding islands while the Navy and Air Force won the decisive battles. So the Ha-Go kept rolling off production lines. Why retool factories for new designs when the existing inventory was adequate for defensive operations? Why divert resources from ships and planes to tanks that wouldn't change the war's outcome? It's logical. It's rational. It's also a death sentence for every man assigned to a tank crew. Japan did eventually design better tanks. The Type 3 Chinu medium tank, developed in 1943, had a 75 mm gun and frontal armor up to 50 mm thick. On paper, it could fight a Sherman on roughly equal terms. But development took time. Production didn't start until 1944. By war's end, only 166 Chinu tanks had been built. None ever left the Japanese home islands. None ever saw combat. Too little, too late. Then there's the doctrine problem. Japanese military thinking was built on China experience. Tanks as infantry support, light armor, high mobility, speed over protection. This doctrine was validated by years of success in China. Changing it meant admitting those years of success were built on fighting weak opponents. It meant admitting the entire armored warfare philosophy was wrong. Military institutions don't like admitting they're wrong, especially when the officers who champion the current doctrine are still in command. Pride, institutional inertia, and bureaucratic politics all pointed in the same direction. Keep doing what we're doing. The Seishin doctrine made it worse. Spirit over material. Japanese military culture emphasized willpower, morale, fighting spirit. The belief that superior morale could overcome material disadvantages was baked into the system. So, when Ha-Go crews reported their tanks were inadequate, the response wasn't, "We need better tanks." It was, "You need better tactics, more aggressive spirit, closer engagement range. Blame the crews, not the equipment. Blame the tactics, not the doctrine." This created a vicious cycle. Tanks performed poorly, so they got lower priority. Lower priority meant worse performance. Worse performance meant even lower priority. Around and around until tank crews were essentially abandoned. Field reports from tank commanders were dismissed or ignored. Combat losses were blamed on crew inadequacy, poor tactics, insufficient fighting spirit, anything except the obvious truth that the Ha-Go couldn't compete against modern armor. No feedback loop, no adaptation, just the same failed doctrine, repeated until defeat. By 1944, Japanese commanders knew the Ha-Go was obsolete. Everyone knew. But at that point, what choice did they have? The tanks existed. The crews existed. The battles had to be fought. So, they adapted tactically within a strategically hopeless situation. Dig tanks in as static pillboxes. At least then they're not exposed while moving. Try night attacks to negate American range advantages. Order suicide charges where one Ha-Go sacrificing itself might take out a Sherman. The kamikaze mentality extended to armor. One tank for one tank was considered an acceptable trade, even though a Ha-Go cost a fraction of a Sherman to build and couldn't be replaced while Shermans could. Individual heroism was celebrated. Propaganda emphasized spirit and sacrifice. The systemic failure that made those sacrifices necessary was never acknowledged. And the young men kept climbing into Ha-Go tanks, kept following orders, kept dying in machines that offered them no realistic chance of survival. The ultimate cost? Measured in thousands of lives. Tank crewmen who did their duty knowing it was futile, who fought bravely in equipment that betrayed them, who trusted their leaders to give them the tools to fight effectively and receive death traps instead. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the final battles. By 1944, Ha-Go crews know there's no chance of survival. Zero. They fight anyway. Orders are orders. Duty is duty. And there's nowhere else to go. The casualty rate in Japanese tank units approaches 100%. Almost no one survives. Those who do carry wounds that never fully heal, physical burns, psychological scars, survivor's guilt that lasts decades. When the war ends, American occupation forces examine captured Ha-Go tanks. The reaction is consistent across reports: disbelief, shock that Japan sent men into battle in these vehicles. One American tank officer writes, "I cannot imagine the courage required to fight in these machines knowing what they faced." Post-war interviews with survivors reveal a common theme: not anger at Americans, not hatred of the enemy, but rage at their own leadership. Betrayal. "We did our duty," one survivor says, "but we deserved better equipment. We deserved leaders who cared whether we lived or died." The families of dead crewmen learn the truth slowly. Their sons, brothers, husbands didn't die in heroic tank battles. They died in one-sided slaughters, sent to fight with weapons that couldn't protect them, sacrificed to preserve doctrine and pride. The Type 95 Ha-Go's legacy extends beyond World War II. It's a warning about institutional failure, about the cost of refusing to adapt, about fighting tomorrow's war with yesterday's assumptions. It teaches us that courage cannot overcome fundamental inadequacies in leadership and equipment, that individual heroism cannot compensate for systemic failure, that organizations, military, corporate, governmental, can fail the people who trust them, and the consequences are measured in human lives. Today, Ha-Go tanks sit in museums worldwide. Stand next to one, touch the thin armor, look inside the cramped interior. Imagine climbing in, knowing what awaited you. These aren't monuments to Japanese armored prowess. They're memorials to men who deserved better, who fought with courage in machines that offered none, who did their duty even when their duty meant death. The crews of the Type 95 Ha-Go proved a tragic truth. Courage and spirit cannot overcome fundamental failures in doctrine, equipment, and leadership. They paid for that lesson with their lives. We owe it to them to remember and to learn.